Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
India's approach to equality has been a twin approach. That is that India has all along followed the approach of approach towards equality through economic development and through tackling the issue of social inequalities. So, Indian strategy was a combined strategy. It was a combined strategy to tackle both the problems of inequalities in income and wealth and the problems of social inequalities. Now, in terms of the importance, are social inequalities given greater priority than economic inequalities, or whether economic inequalities gain greater priority over social inequalities is something that has to be discussed. As far as I am concerned, in certain phases, in the early phase of India's independence, the emphasis was on, priority was on this, on economic inequalities, whereas subsequently the social inequalities also became prominent. They became prominent after 1975 onwards. But the reason why I am discussing India's this twin approach is to point out to you that India's approach has been very unique, because in the countries of Europe, in the advanced economically advanced countries, the emphasis was basically on economic inequalities, and there it was hoped that through economic inequalities, inequalities in terms of status, which they called class inequalities of class, all right, class and status could be taken care of. This was the approach to, this was what transpired in America and Europe. You know that in the USA, this approach did not actually materialize, because the racial inequality did not disappear even after America became one of the most powerful, one of the most developed nations in the world. But only recently, after the emergence of Martin Luther King, that this notion that something has to be done to address the issue of racial inequalities, became prominent in the national agenda. That way, India has been in a better situation. India has been more innovative. We should compliment ourselves for our innovative approach, because we combine both social inequalities and economic inequalities. We wanted to address both of them together. In this regard, I think we should compliment Dr. Ambedkar, who was instrumental. He was one of the main guides in, he is regarded as the father of the Indian Constitution, quite rightly too. As chairman of the Constituent Assembly, he played a vital role in ensuring that social inequalities issues particularly were also addressed. He played a vital role in very many other things. I don't have to I don't have the time to go into that, but he emphasized on Dr. Ambedkar's emphasis on social inequalities was very prescient for those times. Dr. Ambedkar in 1950, January 26, when the Constitution was being adopted, he said that we are entering an era of one man, one vote. One man, one vote, and one vote one value. Right? He said, that's because you remember that India took the bold step of introducing universal adult franchise. This is a very significant innovation again. I think credit should also go to Ambedkar along with Nehru and other members of the Constituent Assembly to have insisted on universal adult franchise. What does universal adult franchise mean? It's every adult. Now adult is defined for voting purposes as anybody who has reached the age of 18 and above. So every adult, male or female, educated or uneducated, irrespective of social status, has a right to vote. In the West, this universal adult franchise was not accepted for quite some time. Women had to fight. There was a suffragette movement in the West, in Europe, to fight for women's right to vote too. So, in this perspective, India was, in the measures that India adopted, the strategy that India adopted was really a revolutionary strategy. Revolutionary strategy for development. And while Dr. Ambedkar said that while we have entered the era of one man, one vote, and one vote, one value, he said that the social and economic structure of our country denies this, denies that one man has one value. One man has one value, it denies it. How? By all of us know, this is especially evident in our caste system, which discriminates between people, which says that some people are more important than others. Now, let me go into the caste system. Anyway, the point that Ambedkar made was that we are entering an age of contradictions. On the one hand, our democratic system accepts perfect equality. On the other hand, our existing social and economic structure, does not accept, this kind of equality. There will be contradictions. And he said that unless these contradictions are resolved, unless our contradictions are resolved and and the system allows for those who were suffering the weight of inequalities from shaking off those weights. Unless that happens, Dr. Ambedkar said there will be, the entire system will collapse, will explode. In fact, it is, one should say that it is because of Dr. Ambedkar's, insistence on recognizing social inequalities that India as a nation held together, has held together till now, because those who were who suffered the pangs of inequality felt that they have a stake in the in the process of nation building, and they will also be able to shed their oppressions, the oppressions and the poverty that from which they are suffering. How did Ambedkar translate this idea of approaching social inequalities, the caste, inequalities? He said that the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, that is, the former untouchable castes, which were which were listed in the constitution, in the constitutional schedule, and the tribal communities, the names of which were also listed in the constitution, they should have reservations in the parliament and in legislative assemblies, so that by this means of empowering them, they should have reservations, quotas in proportion to their to their population, in the total population of the country. And if they enjoy this, if they get this reservation, then they will be, if they get this empowerment, then there will be a march towards one man, one value. Of course, this reservations policy to the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes was subsequently extended to include reservation not only in legislature, it was also extended to include reservation in government jobs and in seats in educational institutions. Now, anyway, this policy during those times, this policy was regarded as a policy of protective discrimination. Protective discrimination in favor of the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. All right, mark the words. It was regarded as protective, as if somebody was protecting the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, their welfare. Today, this term protective discrimination is resented by the Dalits, who are actually scheduled castes, because they say, who is to, why should we be protected? This is our right. This is compensatory discrimination, because whatever discrimination that we suffered in the caste system is being undone. We are being given compensations for the sufferings that we have gone through. But this is not the time for me to talk about the caste system in great detail, but I will have to mention some of the basic features of the caste system in order to, for my own analysis subsequently. Caste system is supposed to be a system of inequalities. What kind of inequalities? It's a very interesting system of inequalities, because there is inequalities on the basis of ritual. All right, some people are given ritual privileges, Brahmins, all right, or given ritual privileges, and some people are denied, are forced to or denied those privileges and are forced to undertake impure tasks. There was for pure tasks, some of the higher castes like Brahmins, whereas for the impure tasks, impure rituals, the Dalits. Now I am using the term Dalit, which has become, which is now in current usage to refer to the scheduled castes. Now, many of the impure tasks, whether it's in a village setting or in a temple setting, many of the impure tasks had to be done by the Dalits, as you know. They were they had to clear the village streets of animal carcasses. They had to engage in menial occupations like scavenging. Even the word scavenging becomes a term of becomes a derogatory term. They had to engage in flaying animals and so on and so forth. Now, all the cleaning the streets of the village, and earlier there was no system of flush toilets. As you know, even now today we have the system of toilets. Thanks to our Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, now we are told that we are now 54% of the Indian population is covered with lavatories. Earlier, it was an appalling 4 or 5% of the Indian households which had lavatories. But be that as it may, they had to engage. The Dalits had to engage in these lowly tasks. Apart from that, the Dalits, this caste system is this caste system of inequalities worked in another way, that it was also inequality in terms of this thing, income and wealth and assets. Wealth refers to assets, because the castes at the top enjoyed property, enjoyed wealth, and had a higher standard of living, and the castes at the bottom, naturally, they were landless. They did not own assets, and they had to, their task was they had to do what's called begar or bonded labor sometimes. That is forced labor. Begar is forced labor. The members of the castes which are considered as low caste, they had to do forced labor, and they were allotted. They were forced into occupations that that actually all manual occupations in our tradition are regarded as lowly as compared to non-manual occupations which are regarded as superior. That's why Brahmins who do not, who pursue knowledge, so-called knowledge, they are regarded as superior. Be that as it may, what I wanted to say simply is that in caste was a system of cumulative inequalities. Cumulative inequalities in the sense is regarded as a system of cumulative inequalities, in the sense that not only did one suffer ritually, he also suffered in terms of economy, because he was always the person at the bottom, always was also poor, and did not have the, they had to depend on the higher castes for his livelihood. And then he was also socially, in terms of socially also, he suffered from the weight of inequalities, because there was discrimination, caste discrimination. They were not allowed to, the SCs were not allowed to enter or drink or eat with the castes above them, and so on. So they together they suffered from the, from the multiple weights of these inequalities. And not only that, they were oppressed, because oppression means they were both oppressed and exploited. Oppression means they were forced to do things that they were forced into jobs, and they were forced to do things that they were unwilling to do. For instance, the job of doing agricultural labor, hard work, and they were not given they were not given any adequate wages. Many of them were forced into bondage. They get debt bondage. They take a loan from the landowner, and in turn they have to work out the loan and the interest through their work. Through their work, they have to engage in labor for the landowner, and this and the rate of interest used to be so high that not only those who bonded, you got into debt bondage, not only were they unable to free themselves in their lifetime, quite often their children also had to carry over the burden of bondage. And in Uttarakhand area, even the women even the laborer's wife had to perform services to the landowning upper castes. So the point that I am trying to make is that caste system was regarded as a system of cumulative inequalities, because it was regarded as not only regarded as a system of cumulative inequalities, it was also regarded as a closed and rigid system. Caste was also regarded as a closed and rigid system. In the sense, it was closed in the sense that each caste closes itself. It doesn't it doesn't allow intermarriages across caste lines. And rigid in the sense, this hierarchy was supposed to be so rigid that it would be difficult to break out and enjoy freedom, because those at the bottom, if they those who where can they run away? In the village setting, where can they run away? Even if they run away to another village, they can be punished by because of the contacts that the villages have with other villages in the neighborhood. So it was a very difficult, it was supposed to be a highly oppressive and exploitative system. By exploitation, I mean in terms of economic exploitation. You don't, you extract more surplus work from the lower castes, and do not adequately compensate for the work they do. So this was supposed to be both an oppressive and an exploitative system. Now, so the Ambedkar's approach, as I said, was to provide for reservations, was to promote equality through the path of reservations and so on. But in the early days, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, who was the first Prime Minister, and many other progressives, they all believed in socialism. Those socialist progressives, thought that, according to socialist ideals, it is argued that culture is something which will change according to changes that occur in the economic system. If the workers who are exploited, if the workers, throughout the system, the workers are those who, the exploited are those who can bring about revolution, and when they get together and then throw out their oppressors, then they will be, equality and socialism. That will be a movement towards socialist societies, and according to these socialists, they've argued that when the workers, because they have a cosmopolitan ideology, they do not are not influenced so much by caste and other considerations, which are all which one has inherited from the past, and therefore when development takes place, the idea of caste, associating oneself with others on the basis of the rules of caste, will disappear, and it's not just caste, even religion, the spread of rationality will make people aware that religion is all false belief and superstition, and therefore the socialists were arguing that what we have to do is to directly attack the economic system and ensure that there is economic development, which will along with development, all this caste and religion will disappear. Therefore, Nehru brought up in this kind of an ideology. So was Ambedkar. Ambedkar was also influenced by socialism, but he had seen, he had worked in the Bombay textile mills amongst the workers, and he found there that caste discrimination existed even in the Bombay textile mills, and the Dalit workers, the scheduled caste untouchable workers, so-called untouchable workers, were not allowed into sections where they had to use their spit to, when there's a yarn is spinning, when this yarn breaks up, they had to join the yarn, and one had to use the spit. One has to use one spit, and in those sections, the Dalit workers were not being allowed. And he found that in the trade union activities also, that the Dalit workers did not get enough of a voice. Therefore, he knew that it is not enough to just think in terms of altering the economic structure, you have to do something much more. That's why he talked about social inequality. But coming back to the India strategies of development, that the greater emphasis was on, especially till 1976, was on socialist development, the path of socialist. He wanted to attain the aim of of India's planning was to evolve India into a casteless and classless society, and the socialist planning was supposed to deliver the goods. Unfortunately, the socialist planning had some reverses, and it could not deliver goods to the extent that was expected. Of course, it brought about certain changes in the rural areas, which I will point out actually not only in rural areas. I think it also brought about changes in the industrial world also, I will point out that these changes did not actually, lead to the liquidation of caste. In fact, it led to a new kind of caste system. It led to the emergence of a new kind of caste system, or rather I should say it fed into the emergence of a new kind of caste structure. I will, I hope to point out how this happens subsequently. I want to devote the next half hour to talk about how the forces let loose by India's development strategy and India's approach towards social to reduce or abolish social inequalities, how in fact it led to the reinforcement of caste in a of course the caste that we have today is in many ways quite different from the caste system that we inherited. I think all along caste has been changing its character. Caste is quite an adaptable system. I will talk about it, and because caste is an adaptable system, it's a flexible system. It has not only survived, it has in some ways it has become still dominant. It's still a dominant force in our society. So much so that our election results are still dependent on the caste affiliation and the way in which members of different caste groups are mobilized for electoral purposes. So caste continues to be important in our public life, and we need to assess why this is the case, especially because there is a bit of a contradiction. There is this very serious contradiction. On the one hand, caste not only remains, caste is is sustaining itself. All right. On the other hand, there is a kind of a socialist spirit that informs our development strategy. It's a bit of a contradiction. We are. I'll tell you why it's a bit of a contradiction, because you see, why do I say that socialist spirit informs our development strategy? If you look at even I mentioned it in an earlier lecture, even today the present NDA government's strategy for development has in itself, Vikas has become a goal in itself today. The present government strategy towards development is a strategy that lays a considerable emphasis on the removal of poverty, on uplifting the poor, on uplifting those sections which are marginal and the like. At this, so even today, the socialist spirit informs our approach to development. This has been throughout the course of India's development history. Since 1947, this has been the case. There was first during planning, there was this socialist approach to equality, although without without making caste a dominant issue. Subsequently, caste relations also became very important. The issue of reservations became important, but this was the era of social justice through caste, through the promotion of caste interests. Subsequently, the theme of the theme of the pursuit of equality extended itself to the issues of women's rights, and not only women's rights, it also extended to the area of the equality of religious minorities as well. So, actually the theme of the pursuit of equality has branched out into various directions, and today the discourse of equality is not only about the discourse of caste equality is still continuing, and now of course the theme of the ideology of the caste of the ideology that is dominant in promoting the mobilization of caste is an ideology which also rests on the idea of rights. All right. So, with the entire the term equality itself we have innovated as because of the various social pressures and political pressures that our country has been facing. But in all this, I want to emphasize that these conflicts, these types of conflicts that have occurred have been integrative conflicts. In some ways they consider the government, democracy as very important, and they have in fact ensured that democratic structures do not break down, as it has happened repeatedly in our neighboring countries. So, this has its positive effects. Now, before I launch into how castes have transformed themselves, how the caste system has transformed itself, I want to also highlight some of the features of the caste system which people do not really sort of take into account. And I think we should take account of these features, because it's only then we realize that in a way although we rail against caste, the system of caste, the system of caste has also been a system that has allowed the cohesion of different segments of Indian society. That's a point I will discuss in the course of the next 20 minutes. Now, what about the features of caste? You see, people have talked about caste as a rigid system. Many sociologists have already pointed out that caste is not as rigid. It's possible for certain castes to improve their status through a process of Sanskritization, through a process over time. They can attain higher status by when they acquire political power, they go to new territories and establish themselves. They become landowners. They can subsequently slowly pass off as belonging to superior castes, and there are many interesting pieces of evidence to point out that even some of the tribes, which are passed off over the years, as Kshatriya, as Kshatriyas in the caste system, and they claim that a status to the Kshatriyahood or whatever it is, or warriors, status of warriors. Now, so the caste system has been regarded as a allows mobility of caste, but it takes over the years, over several years. Of course, those at the bottom of the hierarchy, did not have so many opportunities to move up. That also we should take into consideration, because they also suffered. They also did not. They were not. The Dalits were prevented from learning Sanskrit, or from going to schools. Even if they were going to school, subsequently they were made to sit in the back row, and they were not. The teachers used to neglect them. It happens even now. So the caste system, in many ways, was allowed for some degree of mobility. Then next, caste system is a very peculiarly flexible system. It's like Hanuman. Why do I say Hanuman? Hanuman, you all know, can become, Hanuman had the ability to grow into, can become big, grow into a giant size if he wanted to, if he willed. Or if he willed, he can also become small. All right? So these castes also had that ability. How? There is if you look at the various castes, you see, due to politics, all right, many of these castes which had similar practices, which had similar names, merged together to form bigger castes, all right, and to become dominant castes in who operate the levers of power. We know all whether you take, whether the Rajputs or in South India, in Andhra Pradesh, the Reddis or the Kammas, or even the category of Dalits is a category that consists of a series of congeries of different occupational caste groups. All right, it's not there are the Bhangis, there are the Chamars, there are the Jatavs. There are so many castes within the Dalit category. So for purposes of politics, they can consolidate and form into big categories. So this is called caste stretch. You see, in fact, horizontal stretch of castes. In fact, I remember during the heydays of the Mandal Commission report's implementation in North India in 1989. During those days, the leaders of the Mandal agitation were arguing that the Kurmis of Bihar are the brothers of the Patidars or Patels of Gujarat. So they had links with, and similarly Yadavs who were associated with cow, with tending to cows, they consider themselves, they found that they associated themselves with all those castes which consider themselves as cow keepers and cattle grazers in South India. So it's possible for castes to link across the country, and that's how we know in some ways the unity of the country is maintained, unity of India is maintained. That's one. And then second, if caste can also break down into their separate units and become smaller units for purposes of politics. For instance, now among the Dalits, there is a because of the reservation policies, now they find among the Dalits, some of the Dalits who are not, who have not been able to take advantage of the reservations policy to the extent that they want. They say that those people who get the benefits of the reservation are mainly belong to one particular caste among the Dalit category. Therefore, they want reservations, quotas within quotas. What does it mean? So, caste can also break up into smaller units. In fact, this is, in fact, during at the time of caste census, many of the leaders of the caste deliberately said that don't mention don't mention to the caste, to the person who comes to collect evidence from you, don't mention that you belong to the bigger caste category. You mention your subcaste category. Instead of mentioning the in Karnataka, instead of mentioning the category of Vakaliga, which is a dominant caste, which wields considerable political power, you are a Kunchitiga, is a subcaste of the Vakaliga caste. You call yourself Kunchitiga, so that you will get so that we can consolidate Kunchitigas and lay claims to benefits that the government offers through reservations. So, the point is that castes can stretch themselves and also become small units like Hanuman. So, in this context, it is in this context that we have to look at what has happened to in this context, we should understand why castes are persisting. They are persisting for several reasons. I will list the reasons first. One, development programs. All right. Whatever development programs, whether it's in the era of socialism or now that we have adopted liberal economic reforms where market matters, development programs have somehow or the other consolidated caste clusters and caste groups. How? For instance, in the case of SCs and STs, it can be easily pointed out, because many of the welfare programs, the SCs suffer from landlessness, so you have a special program to give them land. SCs don't have pakka houses, so you build concrete houses for the SCs. There are separate SC, ST development, programs in our plans, and all this has resulted in isolating the SCs and STs from the others. Water, the SCs are discriminated against in terms of access to with the village well. Therefore, you give them a separate, water pipe connection. So, what happens is the SCs become distinct. So, that's one. So, there is no, this does not promote churning process. But second, this is not the second process that development has unleashed is that wherever whenever development is affected, this was the case during the era of socialist planning, and it continues to be the case even today. Whenever development projects occur, what happens is that those who, supposing there is an economic opportunity that is opened up, let's say there is a railways are extending railways, the lines to another part of the country. So they want laborers. So what they do is how do you get your laborers? You have to get laborers through your caste contract. Look at the construction workers. Nowadays construction workers, are the biggest or significant migrants. Look at construction workers, or for instance, look at the way agricultural labor is migrating. For instance, in Karnataka, where I come from, you find in the coffee plantations in the Karnataka, you will find that there are migrants from Bangladesh and Assam, and they come all the way from there, from Assam, and they all belong to one particular community, one particular village. This is how migration takes place. This is called link migration. One person goes and finds that there is an economic opportunity, so he uses his connections to get others to his relatives and his castmates to come and work. So this happens in many you go to Tamil Nadu, you find that in many of the big restaurants, you will find mostly the workers who are working are from the northeast, or from Sikkim, or from Assam. So similarly, if you see the way migration takes place, even across Gulf, migration is through articulation of these caste and kinship links. Not just migration of laborers, migration of even in terms of professional occupations. All right. If you look at the caste composition of the IT industry, all the big programmers who are earning handsome amounts, most of them, you find that this occupation is the monopoly of some of these, Brahmin castes, and not just Brahmin, castes, dominant castes, who were able to see the opportunities coming their way, and they were able to take advantage of it, and they consolidated those opportunities when they entered the field. Naturally, the trust, in all professional business organizations, personal trust is very important, especially in as you go up the hierarchy, the risks, the responsibilities, your responsibilities grow, and accordingly you need people not only competent, you also need people you can trust, you need people who will deliver the goods, will go the extra mile to do the work satisfactorily. So it is in the nature of caste that this tendency to monopolize privileges obtain. Therefore, you find that modern India consists of a large number of caste clusters, in varieties of occupations, in all kinds of occupations. Of course, in politics also this happens. In terms of political representation also, you find certain dominant caste clusters operating at different levels. So the India's development has actually has not been so rapid as to create a churning effect. Manthan nahi hua. The Manthan effect, the churning effect of castes hasn't happened. Of course, it has happened in several cases, but if you look at the overall processes, what you find is that castes become significant units of our social life, whether it is in rural areas or whether it is in, big offices in the government. For instance, even in the field of entrepreneurship, you will find the same phenomenon repeating. That and the caste in the politics also, your family matters. There has been a big debate in recent times about how dynastic India is dominated by dynastic politics, how dynasties continue to wield power that is very strange to the very principles of democracy, but it continues because caste is pervasive and caste has not been shaken up. The system has not been shaken up. In the next section, I will be talking about how these social inequalities are panning out, in our contemporary times. Thank you.